Shit. It's Keith Saarloos, and this is Idiot's Guide to Life with your local idiot, Keith Saarloos. Hey, how are you doing? Time to give you a little bit of update on what is happening here in around Los Olivos, California. I was out of town last week visiting my daughter at TCU University, Texas Christian University. It was Parents Weekend. It was an absolute blast. But returning home, we are in the midst of the most exciting / most terrifying time of the year for any little winery such as ours, because what is happening right now? We are in the third trimester, and the third trimester really comes down to when is this baby coming? And right now there are grapes slowly ripening in the fields. And a lot of people ask me, like, how do you know when to pick? And that is a absolutely wonderful question. And that's something we should probably talk about. So, hey, here we are. Let's talk about it now. So how do you decide when to pick? Well, there are tons and tons of different ways. Basically, you go out and start doing what we call a Brix test. And a Brix test is spelled B-R-I-X. And basically, it's a sugar test. And when we first started this back in 2003, which is terrifyingly long ago, that was our very, very first harvest. We started farming 26 years ago. Our first harvest was now 21 years ago. And what you do is you go out and you go get lost in the vineyard. What I mean by getting lost in the vineyard, I mean you are 100% trying to get lost. Vineyards have things broken up as blocks, and you can have Grenache Noir, Syrah, T. Verdot, Cab Sauv, blah, blah. Those are different varietals, and we should go into that. Varietals are a type of grape. Just like if you think about apples, there's like Golden Delicious, Fuji, Red Ripes, all those things are different varietals of apples. So when you get into varietals of grapes, Syrah, Grenache, Cab, Grenache Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, Mourvedre, Petit Syrah, and so on, those are different varietals of grapes. And each one of those grapes has basically its own flavor profile. They are all the same, but just like you would say dogs, right? Some are Chihuahuas, some are Great Danes, some are Rottweilers. And each one of them has their own unique personality. So what happens is you go into a varietal, and a varietal could have different blocks. And blocks are basically sub-regions of that area inside of your vineyard. So for sake of argument, on any Saarloos & Sons Syrah bottle, we have a hill called the High Hill. We have a terrace we call the Fat Man, and we have a terrace we call the Little Boy. Each one of those are different blocks. And what happens is you go get lost to do a Brix test. You hop on a quad or walk it or whatever. And I'll tell you how I do it. I have a quad. I put a milk crate on the front of it, and I clip on a Ziploc bag. And I put on headphones and listen to a book or music or something. And I kind of methodically get lost in the vineyard. And why do I get methodically lost? Because I am trying to get the greatest cross-section of fruit as I possibly can over, let's say, 9,000 plants. So I'm picking a cluster from the very, very top of the vineyard. Then I'll go down that row. I'll switch to the other side, which might be the sun side. Then I'll go down to the lower part and pick another cluster there. It is very, very specific. Because if it was just the things on the outside, you're going to get bad cross-section. You're going to get only sunny side fruit. And then when you go back out and harvest that entire block, you're going to get all the fruit that's out there. And that could be fruit that's hidden on the inside and is covered by leaves or is not ripe as well as everything else. And that becomes very, very important, because as you're going through that block, as you're looking for everything, you are starting to find different little bits and pieces, and you are trying to get the greatest random assortment of fruit as you possibly can. Now, one of the things that's super interesting about that is we as human beings are 100% conditioned to grab the most ripe fruit as we possibly can. I don't care who you are. If you are going to a grocery store and you're looking at apples and you grab an apple, you are 100%, your brain is hardwired to grab the ripest one. It just is the way it is. So if we ever teach anybody how to go out and do a Brix test, we actually have to break that mold in them, because the first 3 or 4 or 5 times they go out and do a Brix test, we will get sugars that are higher than the total average. So someone goes out, they'll fill up their Ziploc bag with going all over the vineyard, looking at different things and trying to be as random as possible. And they'll always come back 2 or maybe even 3 bricks higher than if I go out and do it, because I'm looking for not the least ripe fruit, but the greatest cross section. So we go out there, get lost, fill up a Ziploc bag. And then there is a thing that we use, spectrometer. So you crush up all that fruit, you get it into a juice. I'm going to tell you how we did it 20 years ago. And you would take a few drops of that mixed up bag of juice as you kind of hand crushed it all over the place. And you put it on a little slide, and you hold that slide up to the sun, and it will give you the sugar reading on that fruit. And we are looking for our fruit to ripen up to somewhere above 22 to 23 bricks. Why is that important? Because 22, 23 bricks, when we add yeast to that grape juice at that point, it has about a 60% conversion to alcohol. For sake of argument, we pick something that is 20 bricks, we're going to get a 12% alcohol. So bricks are very, very important. And we used to do it just by putting it up and looking through the sun on this one little thing. But that is absolutely like going to the doctor and he puts a stethoscope on you, and that's the only reading they take. Where we have progressed in the last 20 years is pretty interesting. Now we have a machine that costs more than my first 3 or 4 cars combined. And we take that whole sample, we crush the fruit, do the same thing, all analog once again. But then we bring that to the winery, and now we put this little probe in there, and now we're getting everything. We're getting the tannic acids, we're getting the yan, we're getting the Brix level. Basically, it's like going to the doctor, they hook you up, and they're running every test possible. And so we're getting an amazing cross-section of that fruit. Why is that important? Because all of those things are the building blocks into what your wine is going to be like. However, the most important part of that, it's kind of like saying, hey, we know that the guitar is in tune. We know that the recording is wonderful. The studio quality of the performance is correct. But that's the scientific side. And now we have the art side. The art side is, if you think about wine, or when we're going to be picking it, which is, I think, the most important piece of any winemaking process, because you can make bad wine from a bad grape and you can make bad wine from a great grape, but the only way you can truly make a truly spectacular wine is to start with truly spectacular grapes. So all of that work we did out in the vineyard, all the blood, sweat, and tears of 364 days of getting this thing to the very right, precise moment, all comes together. Because one of the things we're looking at is Brix, of course. One of the things we're looking at is the acids, of course. But as a grape ripens, the acid comes down and the sugar levels go up. So it is very much like a crosshair. So the thing we're trying to do is get the right level of acid, the right level of sugar. And then there's another crosshair that's sweeping in from the right, which is maturity of the fruit. Because fruit maturity has a massive, massive portion of the way a flavor or a way a wine is going to end up. I think it's even more important, because all the other pieces, the sugar that turns into alcohol, the acid levels, the tannins, all of that kind of stuff, is the tone. It's the way that it sounds. It's a great recording. That's the winemaking process. But is it a good song? And that's the thing that is so interesting to me. That's the thing that makes wine different than any other beverage, because every other beverage, you are trying to make this year's version of last year's success story. A bottle of Jack Daniel's tastes the same way today as it did 50 years ago. They want the printing press. They want Oreo cookies. They want spark plugs. They want everything to be the exact same, even though all the variables are changing. On the other hand, wine, this is where we get in the romance of it all. When you pull a cork on a bottle, you are being transported to that year. Yes, you can make all these adjustments. A wine only has to be called 75%, say, Syrah on the bottle to be called Syrah. You can blend in 25% other things into that wine, which I find disingenuous, but absolutely true. And you can still call it Syrah. You can use Photoshop. You can use filters. You can use all the stuff. Like if it was a photo, you can scrub out things in the background. You can add things. You can highlight things. You can balloon the lips, if you will. The beauty of wine, or the way we're making it, is if we work so hard out there in the vineyard, why would we go and change it in the winery? So our goal is always to roll blank tape, is always to create the live album, to have the recording of the show that you were at, because that is the story we're telling. Every When I look at a hillside, when I look at a block, I think of every berry being a day, a cluster, a berry is an hour, a cluster is excuse me, let's start that over. A berry is a minute, a cluster is an hour, hours turn into days, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into years, and years turned into a lifetime. So when I look at that whole hill, what we're thinking about is trying to get that whole hill ripe, not all exactly ripe at the same way, because all of those different characteristics, from a big high hill down to a lower region, those two grapes are going to taste different from each other. And that's okay. But what we're trying to do is have that whole thing go into one bottle and tell the story of that hill. The French have a wonderful word for that, which is called terroir, which means sense of place. I think that's what we're going for. It's also why the French hate us, because if I'm buying fruit from all over the place, it's kind of like an album where 50 different people, or, there's 50 different producers and 10 people wrote all the songs, right? I like singer-songwriter. I like it when one person sat down, pen to paper, had something rattling around inside their brain that they needed to get out of them. They wrote the words, they wrote the chords, they played it and played it and played it until they got great at it, until they had something to say, and then they shared it with you. The same goes for wine. And right now we're in the process of waiting. And waiting is hard because some people have already picked, a lot of people have already picked, but we tend to wait. And by waiting, we're letting that maturity come in. There is always this moment where we are out there and all these numbers say the thing, but it hasn't popped. There has not been this flavor transformation, and getting to know your fruit is kind of listening and tasting it constantly over years and years and years and years. It's like hearing your kids scream, right? You can hear your kid scream in the middle of a loud room and that's your kid. So when we're tasting our fruit, by being 100% estate, one of the things that comes down is, when does it pop? And constantly tasting it, constantly looking at it, constantly being like in the vineyard every single day during this entire process is absolutely fundamental to the way our wine will turn out. And right now we're in that process of, the babies are coming. We are going to harvest. We are going to bring it to the winery and try not to screw it up. We've picked one varietal, which is Sauvignon Blanc. It is beautiful. It is elegant. I'm very, very happy with it. The bricks are a little bit lower than we thought. They came in right about 23, which is really solid. We thought they were going to be around 24 because people who were testing were about a brick higher than we think. But the process that we're going through right now is kind of the moment, right? When you're kind of waiting for that, to take that photo, to get to that golden light moment where everything just seems to shine. And it is just a moment where you hit the plunger and you grab that photo. It's going to be beautiful on film. It's going to be ready to go, as analog as it possibly can be. And that's the process. That is what we are doing. We are sitting around, nervously waiting, pacing back and forth, checking, until we can harvest it and get into the winery. It's going to be a beautiful process. It takes forever. It's very, very slow, but you have to hold yourself together, because, as my mother once said to me, can't force the grapes to ripen. It has to happen in its own process. It has to happen the way it's going to happen. And we could have bad weather. We could have a cold snap. We could have way too much heat. Everything is at risk right now. And it is incredibly exciting. It's incredibly fun. It is absolutely taxing. You don't sleep much. Your guts are all wound up. But, I have a hard time differentiating anxiety from excitement. At this point, they kind of just feel like the same thing. And I kind of get lost in it. It's been a wonderful time. Today is actually my daughter Brielle Hunter Saarloos' birthday. Couldn't be happier for her. She has turned 20 years old. I looked at my wife the other day and I said, I can't believe you and I have a 20-year-old kid. And now she is the exact same age as Heather was when we got married. And truth be told, Brielle is the reason we live in the San Ynez Valley. Because when my wife was pregnant, I said, we're moving. Because we lived in Long Beach. I love Long Beach. It's great. But I've made three good decisions in my life. My first decision was to marry my wife. The second decision was to move here and raise our children in the San Ynez Valley. Brielle was the reason we moved here. And the third reason, cash, was the reason we opened Saarloos and Sons. We had kids to feed. So when you buy a bottle from Saarloos and Sons, it doesn't go to private plane fuel. It goes to tuition and food for water polo players and our community. Today has been a good day. Woke up early, called Brielle, had a wonderful conversation. I wrote a little bit of something about her on Instagram. I came back to the ranch. We actually harvested a cow today for about 7 families, which was really intense and exciting. Butchered a cow right there. And today, 7 families are going home with meat, and they will be serving it to the ones that they love for the upcoming weeks. And it's found its way to a freezer, which is a wonderful feeling to have of being a part of a community. So I need to get back to work. That was a fun 20 minutes. Hope everything is going well in your life. If you have any questions, comments, or things you want me to talk about on this next time, this really was for Craig Cebulski. And so, hey, Craig, how about that? So this is Keith Saarloos, your idiot's guide to life. That's what we did today. This is what we're waiting on. Harvest is imminent. It's Brielle's birthday. What a wonderful day. Have a great day.